Canada's House of Commons hosted an hours-long debate last night over an NDP motion calling for the federal government to officially recognize the state of Palestine. It took some concessions before a softened version of the motion finally passed in a vote. Some of Canada's allies have signaled that they're open to recognizing the Palestinian territories only once some key conditions are met. Meanwhile, this all comes as Israeli forces raid one of Gaza's biggest hospitals.
The people of Gaza are not responsible for the actions of Hamas. New Democrats are appalled by Netanyahu's bombing of camps, hospitals, and heavily populated areas. These attacks are indiscriminate. The majority of homes in Gaza are gone, universities gone, archives gone, flour mills gone. Make no mistake, collective punishment is a violation of international law.
The way this motion is constructed, it is clearly creating a false equivalency of the state of Israel and the terrorist organization Hamas. And in the event that we want this war to end, Hamas can easily lay down arms and surrender and return the hostages and stop using citizens of Gaza as human shields.
I do not support Hamas. They are a terrorist organization that disregards the value of civilian lives, both Israeli and Palestinian. I do support the Palestinian people and their desire for a state of their own. I support the Israeli people and their state, but I am not a supporter of the Netanyahu government. His government's response in Gaza has been heavy-handed with a massive death toll, and their actions are not moving towards a peace.
Following hours of debate in the House of Commons, the NDP and the Liberals passed an amended version of a New Democrat motion Monday night that had initially called for the federal government to officially recognize the state of Palestine. Instead, the two parties agreed that Canada should actively pursue the establishment of a Palestinian state as part of a negotiated two-state solution, which aligns with Ottawa's existing policy. The motion also included a reference to Hamas as a terrorist organization and a demand that Hamas lay down its arms. Despite the significant changes to the motion, the NDP celebrated the passing of the amended version as a historic win. Writing on X, party leader Jagmeet Singh said they had forced the Liberals to stop selling arms to the Israeli government, support the International Court of Justice, and place sanctions on extremist settlers in the West Bank. However, none of the measures in the motion are binding. Heavy fighting is raging around the Gaza Strip's biggest hospital and surrounding neighborhoods during the second day of the Israeli military's raid on the facility.
This morning, the IDF conducted a precise operation to thwart terrorism in the Shifa hospital area. Footage shows terrorists firing from deep within the Shifa complex.
Thousands of Palestinian patients, medical staff, and displaced people were trapped inside the sprawling Shifa hospital complex in northern Gaza. The military said it had killed 50 Hamas militants in the hospital, but it could not be independently confirmed that the dead were combatants. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says he remains determined to carry out a ground invasion of the southern Gaza city of Rafah, despite misgivings by world leaders.
The President and the Prime Minister spoke at length about Rafah today. The President explained why he is so deeply concerned about the prospect of Israel conducting major military operations in Rafah, but a major ground operation there would be a mistake. It would lead to more innocent civilian deaths, worsen the already dire humanitarian crisis, deepen the anarchy in Gaza, and further isolate Israel internationally.
As Netanyahu pushes forward with his plans for Rafah in the south, international agencies are warning that famine is imminent in northern Gaza. We're joined tonight by international human rights lawyer and senior fellow at the University of Ottawa, Neve. Alex, we saw a marathon voting session in Canada's House of Commons last night on a motion put forward by the NDP to recognize Palestine as a state. Now, the motion passed, but not until a number of changes were made to it. What do you make of where things sit?
Well, I think this is one of those instances where people have been struggling between glass half full, glass half empty. And I think I've landed with glass half full. Clearly, there was an overarching sense of disappointment because I think many lawyers, advocates, civil society activists, and community members who who are gravely concerned about what's happening on the ground in Gaza and have wider concerns about the long-standing human rights violations experienced by Palestinians. We're very pleased to see that the motion had a strong recognition of the state of Palestine as an essential part of advancing the two-state solution that we often hear about and which the Canadian government supports. And this would have been a huge step forward, certainly in Canadian policy, but it also would have put, we certainly would not have been the only country out there. There's well over 100 countries in the world that have recognized Palestine as a state, but we certainly would have been a leading state amongst some of our closest allies. But in the end, I think that while that certainly is a disappointment, and we keep that for another day, it doesn't mean that that's not going to happen and that there won't be other opportunities, but that what we gained, nonetheless, with the motion even watered down passing, and the fact that it was supported by almost every single Liberal MP, including the Prime Minister and virtually, I think, except for one or two members of his cabinet who weren't present, that level of cabinet support is very significant.
When we talk about a ceasefire, obviously there's multiple parties engaged and working to broker one. Politicians here in Canada have more access to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu than they do to Hamas leaders. So how can Canada encourage Israel to agree to a ceasefire?
But I think we make it absolutely clear that Canada demands and expects that Israel agree to a ceasefire, not that we urge, hope, wish, express disappointment. There needs to be unequivocal statements from Canada. I think now seeing it backed up with some of the kinds of concrete action that yesterday's motion includes, so announcing that we're going to fully stop arms transfers, taking steps to start imposing sanctions against some of the settlers in the West Bank who are responsible for extreme acts of violence. That will start to make it clear to the Israeli government that Canada's serious now. We're no longer just nudging the Israeli government. We're prepared to start to impose consequences for failure to respect human rights and ensure the well-being of the people in Gaza. At the same time, I think we need to be working much more actively multilaterally to ensure that our like-minded partners and allies are advancing those same positions, are saying the same thing to the Israeli government. I think those are the kinds of options that are open to us.
We always value your insights here on Trending Now, Alex. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good to talk to you, Nicole.